Hey everybody, this is Chris with Overclockersclub. I'm back again with a couple more coolers, this time from ID Cooling. And we've got two very different ends of the spectrum. We've got a very small, compact downflow cooler, an air cooler. And at the other end, we've got a very large liquid cooler with some cool RGB fans. So let's see what's inside the boxes. So the first one we'll look at here is the very small IS-65. When you open the box, there's a small instruction sheet that goes over what's included and then the different socket coverage. But this is a very simplistic cooler, and it does not come with a fan. You supply your own 120 millimeter fan, which is exactly what ID Cooling has done. They supplied me with a CF12025 circular LED fan. You can tell from the green accents that this is going to have a green ring that sort of lights up from the LEDs. And it is a 4-pin PWM fan. It is not an RGB fan, so you purchase these in specific colors. This one here is green, and the mounting provisions here are already on the little tabs that extend over the end of the cooler there. Now this is a downflow cooler, which means that all the air that this fan would move down through the cooler is going to go down across the motherboard, and the good thing is that will help cool your motherboard components. The only downside to that is you need to make sure that your case, and I guess it's not really a downside, but you need to make sure that your case has sufficient airflow through the case so that any heat that's removed by the cooler can make it out of the case. Looking at this cooler, we do have only 3 heat pipes. Usually you see at least 4, but this one has 3. And we do have a center support bracket to keep this parallel to the base. A lot of times when you only have a few heat pipes there, this can kind of bend around on you. The other thing I notice here, the brackets for mounting are attached, and there's a little sticker here to protect the base plate. And when we peel that off, usually these are machined perfectly flat. You cannot even feel the bottom of the heat pipes there, but I can feel a little bit of a joint there. You can feel that junction. So I don't know if that's going to be a problem or not. We'll have to see when we do some of the thermal testing. But this is a very small compact cooler, and it's really made for a PC where you've got very limited clearance. You just don't have much room in there, so you're going to be very limited. So consequently, a small cooler like this, you're going to be limited in terms of what you can handle thermally. Socket coverage for Intel, we've got Intel LGA 1150, 51, 55, and 56. And AMD, we go all the way up to an FM2 Plus and an AM4. So we're a little limited. We don't cover any of the 2011 sockets for Intel or 2066, anything that's fairly new, but you probably wouldn't want to put a small cooler like this on a CPU of that magnitude anyway. So we'll go ahead and get this 120 millimeter fan installed and get this mounted to the motherboard. Specs on the fan, our fan speed goes up to 1600 RPM, and we draw a 1/4 amp. So we'll go ahead and get this thing all installed and look at what some of the thermals show. So now we're ready to do the install. There's the thermal paste. We got some little washers here, little round washers you punch out, and they go with the fastener that comes up from the bottom of the motherboard and attaches into these little corner brackets. And you can see that's actually a nut that's wedged into each corner so it can't spin on you. And then your cooler sits on top of the motherboard. I don't have thermal paste on there just yet. We'll do that in a moment. But you've got a couple options. The overhang, when the fan overhangs there, you've got a couple options as far as which way. You can overhang the fan over the top of the motherboard there, or you can go overhang the opposite side. So you can put it on there any one of 4 different orientations. I'm going to put it on there like this. There's kind of a close-up of the base plate there, and you can see a little bit how it's kind of uneven there. A little bit of a ridge, but we'll see how big of a factor that is in the ability to transfer heat. So everything's assembled. We've got the fan on there. It's just sort of sitting on there for now. I haven't used the fasteners because during the thermal testing I'll show you what the heatsink looks like, where the heat builds up on it. And I'll have to have the fan off to do that. But our temperatures are right around in the low to mid 30s at idle with no load on the system, no overclock. So let's get the thermal camera out and see what that looks like. So again, this is with no overclock, no load. This is looking at the intake side of the fan. And then down underneath, you can see the base of the cooler there. It's right around 33, 34, 33, right around in there, 35. And we'll go ahead and pull the fan off here, just so we can see the heat pattern on top of the heatsink. And with no load, we're around 33. See, and again with no fan there, we'll slowly see the temperature creep up. But with no load there, it'll take a little while. So now we'll go ahead and crank the overclock up and see what it looks like. Alright, so now it's overclocked, and one thing I wanted to mention real quick is the height of the cooler from the motherboard surface to the top of the fan here is about 100 millimeters. So if you're sizing a case for that clearance, then that's what you'll need to know. Of course, the graphics card here is higher than the cooler anyway, so you probably want to go with a low profile card if you're really trying to cram this into a small system. Anyway, our overclock is sitting at 4.2 gigahertz. We're in the mid 40s at idle with no load, so we're a little warmer than we were before the overclock was applied. So now we'll look at the thermals here when we crank up the heat. So now we're running with the overclock cranked up, and we're pretty much bouncing off the thermal limit there at the high end. You can really see the heat down there on that base plate. I don't know how much those uneven heat pipes are playing into this. The numbers didn't look bad for no real load on it, so if we pull this up here, we'll certainly get this thing nice and toasty without any airflow. Yeah, the numbers are definitely going up. So we'll put that fan back on there. The downflow is nice because you are pushing air across some of these components down here, adding to the cooling, but and then if we look at the system here from the top, the intake temperature still a little warmer, and we are bouncing off the 99C, 100C upper thermal limit. See if I can look at the back side here. And then come around the other side. So our thermals showed that we were bouncing off the upper limit pretty quickly when we put a load on it. Now, again, this isn't the type of cooler that you would really want to use in an overclocked system where you're really going to thrash it, especially with a high horsepower CPU. This is really meant for a situation where you really need a low profile cooler and you're really limited on space. The other thing with the downflow that I've talked about before is you really are at the mercy of the airflow through the case. So you really need to have good fans on the front and the back of the case moving air through. That way any of the heat that's extracted from your cooler has a way out of the case. So next up is the Auraflow 240. Now it should be no surprise that it should perform several orders of magnitude better than the IS-65. But before we look at that, real quick, I did review this one already. This is a FrostFlow Plus 280, and it kept temperatures right around 75°C, maybe a tick below. So it'll be interesting to see how the Auraflow 240 with a slightly smaller radiator performs against the 280. We'll be using the same motherboard, same CPU, same test methodology. So let's see what it looks like. Let's get it out of the box. And looking at the items here, we got two 120 millimeter fans. And if we look at them a little more closely, you will see that we have two leads. One of these is the 4-pin regular PWM plug, and then the other one here is going to be for your RGB control. And then we have the cooler itself. There's the pump. We've got the protective plastic cover over that to protect the base plate. We've got some very nice soft braided lines, and they are flexible so your lines can move. And then looking at the radiator, very nice ID Cooling logo. They've got a little, like a brushed insert there. And we got mounting holes on both sides for fans in either a push-pull configuration if you like, or you can just put fans on one side. And the pump also has a couple cables here. One here is a SATA style power cable to deliver power to the pump. And then we've got the RGB plug for RGB control across the top there. So we'll see that when we get it powered up. Taking a look inside the main hardware box, we got some thermal paste. We've got a fan splitter here so you can run both of the fans off of one single socket on the motherboard. All of our installation hardware here for AMD or Intel sockets. We got our base plates and our, again, our mounting hardware for either Intel or AMD installations. Got a user guide here. Shows you how to do your Intel and AMD installations, and then we also have the RGB controller, and it shows you how to set that up. So now inside the small box, there are two sets of cables here, and the way this works, and it's explained very briefly in the instructions, but you have two ways to control the RGB on this. If you do not have a motherboard that has that capability, RGB control, which my test motherboard does not, but if you do have a more modern motherboard that has that, then you can plug the RGB fans and the pump directly to the motherboard with this cable set here. And it's very important on all the RGB systems to look at the plugs, and there's a little arrow on one side. It's very important to line those arrows up. If not, you can damage the system, so you really want to watch that. And it's kind of hard to see, but they're on there. I've seen them on all RGB cables and systems. Now the other way is if you don't have a motherboard that has the RGB control on it, well, they give you this little controller here. You plug that into a Molex connector to power it up, and then this will plug into the cable system, and then that will connect to your RGB fans and the pump. And this has three little buttons on it. It's got a mode, a speed and brightness, and then a color mode. So once we get this powered up, we can see how it all works. And just for reference, I wanted to show the difference between the old FrostFlow 280 and the new Auraflow 240. You can see the difference between the two is considerable. You may not think there'd be that much between a 240 and a 280, but you can see there is a noticeable difference between the two. It is considerably larger, especially when you line them up there. It's of course taller and longer on the end. The other thing here, I noticed, they do use different pumps. Sometimes manufacturers will use the same pump across product lines, but the pump here for the Auraflow 240 does appear to be slightly larger, and that may be because they've incorporated the RGB components into that pump, so they're using a different pump altogether. So I got the bracket assembled for the Intel install. This will go up from underneath, and then you Use these little washers that you punch out. They go underneath these standoffs that screw on top of that, and then you secure the bracket down with these fasteners here. And of course, don't forget to peel off the sticker. I've seen where people get excited and in a hurry and in a rush, and they end up leaving that sticker on there, and they can't figure out why. Their system is overheating. Okay, so there you go. Now we have a fresh, clean surface for installation. So now the system is all powered up. I have the RGB just set to cycle through the different colors. I turned the room lights out, but the skylight above is still letting quite a bit of light in, but you can kind of see the effect there. It is much more exciting when it's dark. Alright, so I'll cycle through the manual controller here. Now if you had a motherboard that supported it, you could do all this from the software on the hard drive and do it all from your keyboard. But these are the different modes. You can change speed, you can change function. There's the speed change there on the flash. I can slow it down. I can change color. So there's a lot you can do here. And again, the software controls from a motherboard that supports it will allow you to do even more. So now it's time to do the thermal testing. Now what the thermal testing should show is that one side is going to be the warm coolant from the pump that's coming into the radiator, and the other side will be the exit. And somewhere about in here in the middle of the tank there's a baffle that separates the two sides, so that the warm coolant coming in from one side is forced to travel down one half of the radiator where it collects in the bottom, and then it comes over to the other side and it travels up the radiator through the exit. And that's how your path, how the path of your coolant usually works. So what the thermal camera should show is one side you'll see a distinct color difference on one half of the radiator. Now we have the system powered up. It is not overclocked and it is running at idle with no loads, so there's not much excitement going on here with this cooler. You can see the temperatures across the radiator are pretty consistent, and you can see a little bit of heat from the fan motors. And then looking across the motherboard, of course, you'll see all the hot spots. Not much going on with the pump there. A little bit of warmth there at the top. So we'll go ahead and crank it up and should see quite a difference. Now the overclock is cranked up to 4.2 gigahertz. We have a load with Prime 95. And you can see one half of the radiator has definite color and temperature difference. So you can definitely see the hot side at the top. That's where the heated water is coming in from the pump. It's showing it's around 33. And it should drop off as we get closer to the bottom of the radiator. And then the coolant makes the transition over, and we slowly come back up, and again we should continue to drop in temperature a little bit. Looks like we drop out, or bottom out I should say, at about 31.1. So we take a couple degrees off from between the inlet and the outlet. And then looking over at the pump, still a little warm spot over there, a little warmer than it was before. The rest of the pump looks pretty cool. Of course, we have quite a bit of heat over here on the VRM since we're cranked up with that 4.2 gigahertz overclock. Look at the back side again, you can see the hot spots there for the fan motors. And there's the coolant side coming in, the warm side, and then the cool side coming out. Overall, comparing this to the FrostFlow 280, which was holding things at around 74 degrees, this one is holding them at around 75, 76, so we're a little bit warmer with this one, but not much, and that may be in part to the smaller cross section on the radiator there, smaller surface area. But it can definitely hold its own with a similar overclock. So, wrapping this all up, the Auraflow X240 can handle the heat. We showed that with the thermal testing there. Very similar numbers to the FrostFlow 280, just a little bit warmer, probably because it's a slightly smaller radiator. If you like the RGB stuff, I've seen this system right here, the Auraflow 240, as cheap as $79 on Newegg. Just watch for different sales. But a decent cooler you can tie into your RGB motherboards that support that. The IS-65, small but not so mighty. It struggled handling the heat, but then again, it's not meant to be a cooler that you would use on a system that you're going to thrash or overclock. It's more for a low profile where you don't have much space. I looked around for pricing. I couldn't find any on that one. Similar coolers, though, made by ID Cooling are in the $33 to $40 range. So that's probably about the sweet spot for that cooler. And then you can get these fans here, the CF12025. It is a green LED fan. They have different colors, red and blue. But these are around $7.99. So ID Cooling has quite a few products you should check out. This is Chris with Overclockers Club. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.